Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we have an engine showcase for you guys. Today I wanted to show you guys my Pennsylvania Railroad T1. This one's made by Broadway Limited Imports, and it is of the as delivered appearance, 1945 as delivered appearance, T1. Now, for those who hasn't seen, I made a recent spoiler video about 2 weeks ago showing how this engine has working wheel slip, which is something I added to this engine. It was kind of a spoiler, and I got a lot of questions and comments about how I did it. So this video is kind of an explanation of it. This is going to be a longer video, and it's going to be a lot of me talking. I'll try to add pictures and things in between, but it'll be a lot of me talking. So if you guys want to skip around to other segments, I want to cover a lot of various topics on this engine. So if you want to skip around, feel free. I have chapters down below. But I want to begin by talking about the historical significance of these Pennsy T1s and the prototypes. Then I want to talk about how I did the actual wheel slip, some kind of tips and tricks. Note that this video is not a how-to video. I wrote a whole forum post, like a whole thread, about how I actually did it in more detail. This video is kind of just like verbally talking about it, ranting about some various things I had to consider. But it is not a how-to guide. If you want to see the forum post, there is a link down in the description below. I would recommend you guys check it out. But anyways, so I'll talk about how I did the wheel slip, as well as some other modifications I did to this engine, including changing, adding working markers, for example, and some other modifications. And then I want to give a quick review of the BLI T1. I think, just my opinions about this model and how well or poorly BLI made this engine. And finally, we'll conclude it off. But that will be the overall scope of the video, so if you want to skip around, feel free, as I said. But without further ado, let's get started talking a little bit about the history of the Pennsy T1. So, what kind of inspired me to try to simulate wheel slip on this engine, on this model, is primarily because of the history of this engine. These T1s were notorious for having really bad wheel slip issues. So that was kind of what they're best known for, and people love to discuss, whether if it was a bad design choice or it was just simply because the engineers who were operating this engine were just not very experienced. There's lots of contention about that, but in general, my opinion is, a well-designed steam engine should not require significant experience to operate. It should just be, it should be relatively straightforward to operate. So anything that requires a really delicate or fragile throttle inputs or stuff like that might be a sign the engine was not the best designed. Anyways, but these engines actually had a lot of other issues besides just the wheel slip issue that I think are often overlooked. Historically, I have a list of them that were cited from various operators' historical records. But besides the wheel slip, these things suffered extreme vibrations while running at higher speeds. This was a really serious issue. It shook headlights and pipe fittings loose. It would result in frequent poppet valve failures. These poppet valves that they used on these duplexes were very fragile. That's kind of one of the biggest issues with them, was that they're very fragile and they would not like vibrations. So as a result, these would constantly shake loose, and the vibrations would cause it to be damaged. And as a result, these were constantly, had to be maintained, and were always frequently in the shops because of the fragile poppet valves. The tender would slam against the back of the engine just because of the size, and that would cause more vibrations. The reversers would frequently jam. You'd have clogged water strainers. The superheater would leak in this engine. So there was a lot more issues than just the wheel slip, but the wheel slip was the biggest issue. And the way that works is that this boiler would build up. It's a big boiler, so it builds up a lot of steam pressure, and because it's a duplex engine, not a compound engine, the boiler pressure would be split to the two sets of cylinders, and because the front set of cylinders would slip, presumably because the front of the engine was a little bit lighter, all these built up steam pressure would exhaust through the front set of cylinders, and so not only will your front set of drivers slip, but because the steam pressure is all gone now, the rear set of drivers would also lose its power. So as a result, you just had an engine that had really lots of trouble accelerating, and was there as a result not very fuel efficient. But yeah, so that's kind of the issue with these engines, and that's kind of what inspired me to try to replicate the wheel slip, on these models. The prototypes for these engines didn't last very long. I modeled 1947-ish, and that's a perfect time for this particular model here. But the timeline was very short. So two experimental T1s was built in like the early 40s, but then the majority, the 50 other T1s was built between 1945 to 46. 1 year later, 1947, diesels were introduced, primarily E-units, which would replace the T1s, pulling the blue ribbon, or aka the first class, top tier, most expensive passenger trains. And as a result, by starting in 1947, these T1s were pushed to pull secondary trains like mail express trains and whatnot, and they'd also get a lot dirtier as a result. 1 year after that, so by 1948, the vast majority of these T1s were all, modernized or partially deshrouded. So, various pieces of shrouding would get cut, like here, or the tender shrouding would get cut for easier maintenance. They added pilot ladders for safer operation for the crew, because these steps are kind of dangerous. So that modernization period began 1946 and ended by 1948. And then 4 years after that, 1952. By 1952, all of the T1s were sidelined, all retired. None of these were still operating, and eventually scrapped. Partially that was due to the fact that, again, the wheel slip and the other reliability issues and the fuel lack of fuel efficiency. But also it was because this was cited by the maintenance shop leader of the Altoona Works. He cited that these were retired early, also because of the fact that spare parts for these T1s are relatively rare. So in the early 50s, any Pennsylvania Railroad class steam engines, with relatively small numbers, would likely get sidelined. So the T1s would have very few spare parts, unlike the K4s and the M1s, for example. Those had tons of spare parts, and also Pennsylvania Railroad would make those in-house. These T1 spare parts were, by comparison, a lot rarer, and so that's why the entire T1 class was chosen to be sidelined, and the K4 was preferred after that. Despite being the K4 being, a weaker, smaller engine. They were just easier to run, more reliable, and there's tons of spare parts. Anyways, so that's a bit about the history, and that's kind of what inspired me to make a wheel-slipping T1. So let's talk about that next. Okay, let's now discuss how I actually modified this engine to, perform wheel slips on the front set of drivers on this engine. I want to preface this by saying that this was originally inspired by ELS Train Service. They have various YouTube videos where they show off modified brass engines that have, slipping wheel slip, or, wheel slip on their engines. They seem like they mainly specialize on brass engines, so I believe I am the first person to ever do this on a ready-to-run engine, which is harder because there's less, space in the shell, because ready-to-run engines have, a bunch of die casts that's intended to only fit the things that the original factory was intended to fit, whereas brass engines have a lot of open space inside. Anyways, so yeah, this was inspired by them. I wanted to give them credit for that. But that being said, this took a lot of effort. But the main three things that have to occur to enable this on your engine is, first, you have to split the mechanism to be run independently by two motors. Next thing is having a dual decoder setup. You have to have two decoders controlling each of the motors independently. And then finally, 3, you have to offset the center of mass in the engine to remove weight off of one set of drivers and place on the other to favor one set of drivers wheel slipping. So we'll kind of go through each of the points one by one. So to begin, I had to just even see if this project was feasible. I had to kind of mentally map out to see if there's any space to modify this mechanism to, split into two. Unfortunately, there is. The stock BLI mechanism has a big fat can motor in the middle with two flywheels, some universal joints or shafts that connect to two gearboxes that drive the first and third and the fourth set of drivers. That fortunately means that it's relatively easy to split. So I decided that I needed to find a place to put a second motor And conveniently, this thing has a smoke unit, which I wasn't planning to use anyways, in the front here. So that was a perfect opportunity for me to add a second motor. I chose not to add it in the rear because I wanted to reserve the rear for weight. I'll talk more about that later. But I did some calculations or like drawings, and I found out that you can actually fit a Mabuchi FF130 motor. It's a small motor, but it was the biggest one I could possibly fit in the front here. Perfect size. In order to fit it, I had to remove a flywheel and a universal joint, so the worm just directly sits on the motor axle in the front here. And it's like crammed right up in the front. I made custom 3D printed motor mounts to screw mount the motor into the existing screw holes. That allowed me to basically split the mechanism up into two. So now you have two same gearboxes with two different size and speed motors driving the two sets of drivers. Next thing is the 2 decoder setup. Dual decoder setups are always kind of a pain, mostly in the programming department. But I chose to use ESU lockdown decoders. That's actually kind of what made this entire thing possible, is because ESU decoders have a feature called drive hold, which basically when you enable it on a decoder, it will basically override any throttle input. So the idea is if you put drive hold on only one of the 2 decoders, then that set of drivers will basically, stay at its original intended speed with the drive hold feature pushed. And then the second set of drivers, you can increase the throttle there and it will basically, speed up and then slow down or whatever. And the other set of drivers will stay at the constant speed that you originally were, set the engine at until you disable drive hold. Then both decoders will speed or slow down to whatever input you had. And I'll give a demonstration of that in a little bit. But anyway, so with ESU decoders, that's the only way I was able to do this. I ended up putting 1 decoder in the engine and 1 in the tender for 2 reasons. One is it makes programming easier. So instead of having like a switch to turn off 1 decoder so I can program the other one to isolate the decoders, I just simply having 1 in the engine and 1 in the tender means that I could just put only the engine on the track to program 1 decoder and then only put the tender on the track to program the other decoder. Because these decoders are both set to the same address, which is 5536. So that makes programming easier. But then separately, with 1 decoder in the engine, that reduced the wire count needed to plug the engine to the tender. If you had both decoders in the tender, you would need a bunch more wires. You need the pickup wires, the 2 motor wires, the other 2 motor wires, and all the light wires. And that in total ended up being 9 wires. This stock BLI plug only has 8 wires, so having 1 decoder in the engine means that can handle the the lighting outputs on the engine, therefore reducing the wire count to only 6 wires. Again, I mentioned more about all that in the forum post article, so if you want to go see that, please go take a look at that. But anyway, so that was the second reason. The third point, which I forgot to mention in the original recording, is mentioning the weight and the center of mass of this engine. So as I said, this engine originally had a center of mass roughly in the middle here, which is good. You want your engine to be balanced, so all your drivers get equal, weight distribution placed on it for equal traction. But in this case, because I want the front set of drivers to wheel slip, I actually need to shift the center of mass to the rear. If you can imagine, if the front is heavy and the rear is light, then the rear will slip. If the center of mass is towards the rear of the engine, your front of the engine is like almost lifted. It's very light in the front here, and that enables the front set of drivers to slip. And that's actually really important. That's really important for many reasons. For one, because the front is lighter now, it means that I can use a less powerful motor. Because if you imagine, if this thing was really heavy in the front, you would need a much more powerful motor to enable the wheel slip. But because the front's lighter, I can use a slightly smaller motor, which helps because the biggest motors I was able to cram into here is still relatively small. The second thing is it reduces the amount of wheel wear while I do the wheel slip. If this is really heavy in the front, then the wheels are scraping against the rails much more. So because the front's lighter, it means there's less wheel wear. And that also means that because the rear is heavier, now the engine, since the rear is now doing most of the pulling with the bigger motor and the traction tire in the rear, it's good that this back area is heavier. It means that this engine can still pull a very decent sized train. This obviously can't pull as much as it would originally could pull without, you know, the 2-motor setup, but it still can pull a very respectable train, especially with the traction tire in the rear. So not too worried about the pulling power department. But that being said, yeah, the center mass had to be shifted. As far as how I shifted it, all I did was I removed some weight in the front, most notably the smoke unit and the flywheel. But then I also added 1.5 ounces of weight in the rear here to, again, shift that center mass. So as a result, the front is pretty light, whereas the rear is much heavier, and that really helps. So the center mass is now roughly around here, I believe. Which doesn't seem like a huge difference, but it definitely does make a difference. Anyways, back to the original recording. Some other things to consider. As I said, I had to enable the drive hold feature to make this whole thing work. I made it so the decoder that doesn't have the drive hold on F4, when you press the function button to enable drive hold on this decoder will temporarily remove any momentum settings. That allows me to increase the throttle really rapidly, and the wheels will immediately turn up instead of slowly accelerating and slowly decelerating. So that's how So I made 2 custom sound profiles, or profiles for each of the decoders to kind of make this effect. I also made custom sound profiles. So actually, one of the decoders has the full set of sounds, like the whistle, the bell, the chuffs, etc. And the other decoder only has chuffs and brake sounds. There's no air compressors, no bells, no whistles, none of that stuff. That's because I found in testing, if I had, for example, the bell sound on both decoders, which, by the way, is each driving one of the speakers in the tender. BLI engines have 2 speakers usually, so it actually helps. I found that if you had, the bell sound, for example, on both decoders and they play together, there would be like a weird audio effect where one of them is slightly slow than the other, and it would just sound really, really weird. So as a result, I found that it's best to just only have one decoder play that sound and the other decoder just not worry about it. And yeah. All right, so that's programming. Oh, I also had to speed match these 2 decoders perfectly. That took a long time, but getting it so, because, I used 2 different motors with 2 different speed curves, I had to perfectly speed match each of these, make custom speed tables for each of them, to make it so at every single speed step, the decoders are perfectly in sync. That's really important, because if you don't do that, then, these motors are constantly fighting each other. During the entire runs, and that will lead to increased gear wear and wheel wear and whatnot, and that's just not good, and your motor might burn out. So didn't want that to happen, so that was kind of a pain. I also made the chuff sync a little bit offset for the 2, just to give that natural rhythm of the chuffs going in and out of sync. Yeah, I think that's it for programming. All right, here's a demonstration of the wheel slip on a controller. So I have the drive hold feature set to function F4. So you'll see whenever I press F4 and I turn up and down the throttle, the first set of drivers will respond. Now, people often ask me what happened, how do I make it so they will both ensure, I'll ensure that they both return to the same speed step. And that's actually very simple. Once I disable F4, whatever the speed step it's currently set to, both decoders will go to whatever speed step the engine's currently set to. So for example, if I trigger wheel slip, starting at speed step 2, and I speed it up to speed step 10 to trigger the wheel slip, this set of drivers will be at speed step 2 still. This will be up to 10. And then say I return it down to speed step, say 4. So not all the way back down to the original speed. This will return back to 4. And then when I release drive hold, this set of drivers now sees that locomotive 5536, aka that decoder, needs to speed up. So now this will speed up to speed step 4. Therefore, these 2 will return to the same speed until I press F4 again, where I can differentiate the speeds. So here's an example of that. So let's bring it to speed step 2. I'm gonna enable drive hold now. I'm gonna rapidly increase the throttle. You can see the first set driver slip. And then say we bring it to speed step 4 and I disable drive hold now. You'll see that the rear set of drivers will now speed up to match the first ones. So in other words, when F4 is not enabled, both sets of drivers will run at the same speed until I press F4 and then I rapidly increase the throttle, and if I undo it, it will return to the same speed. Now similarly, if I press drive hold and for whatever reason I drop the speed, the first set of drivers will respond to that until I undo F4 and now, both sets of drivers will return to whatever speed this is at. So anyways, now you can see they're both at 0. But that's not really a fun feature. There's no point doing that. But yeah, in practice, I think this really sells the appearance of it. And hopefully a demonstration can help explain how this thing works a little bit better than just me talking. And then finally, I made some other modifications to the engine that's not related to the wheel slip. For one, as I said, I upgraded the stock BLI speakers with some really beefy 4-ohm 3-watt subwoofer speakers. They're a lot more bassy and they sound really, really good. I also made a custom 3D printed speaker enclosure for the tender. So yeah, this engine sounds beautiful and very deep, with very deep chuffs. Besides that, I didn't modify anything on the exterior of the engine. Well, I did paint the hoses with silver tips. But I did make some few other adjustments in the lighting department. So, with 2 decoders now, and each decoder can control 8 lighting outputs, I had basically 16 lighting outputs to play with. So I wanted to use some of them at least. So I obviously have the backup light working, but I also added working markers. I drilled these out and added some red lights in there, so they look really nice. The number boards I kept lit up. The class lights I painted green, so they're a little bit, I like the change of color. That was a nice touch. And then the headlight I modified quite a bit. The stock BLI headlight had the LED like all the way in the back, and it was kind of bluish. And then there would be like a long tube that brought it out to the front. Now that means that the headlight is very bright if you look at it, directly, but if you look at it from the side angle like we are here, it would be very, very dim. So I ended up drilling that entire tube out and placing an LED, a warm white LED, directly in the front right here, and that makes the headlight very bright from all angles. And I think that was a pretty nice addition to the engine. I also, by the way, I polished this outside trim here, so it's nice and shiny. I thought that was a nice little touch. But that's pretty much it as far as modifications go. Yeah, I think overall BLI did a pretty good job about the detailing, so I didn't really modify much of that. Actually, that transitions us perfectly to our next segment, which is kind of a quick review of the BLI T1 model. So let's go into that. All right, and finally, a quick review of my thoughts on the Broadway Limited Imports Pennsylvania Era T1. So in total, BLI has actually made 6 runs of the Penzi T1 and HO scale. And of the six runs, I was very specific in choosing this particular run because some of the other runs have problems that I don't know if people are aware of. So for one, BLI made both the as-delivered appearance, as you can see here, and the modernized appearance without some of the shrouding, without the portholes, and without the tender shrouding up here. And of the 6 runs, 2 of them are the as-delivered, 4 of them are the modernized appearance. They made the modernized engine first in Paragon 1, and then they later, introduced the as-delivered. So these are actually newer tooling, which means more detail. So if you're looking, so just be aware of that. The modernized ones do look older. They have cruder tooling, so, they have less separately applied details like these. There's a lot more molded on, handrails and grab ends and whatnot. So anyways, so that's partially why I chose the as-delivered appearance, because not only is it more detailed, but also I think it looks better. I used to like the modernized appearance more, but the as-delivered appearance has really grown on me recently, and I really like it a lot more now. So that's one reason I got this model. The other thing to note is, the other thing to note, besides the fact that the modernized ones are, cruder in detail, is the fact that there was 2 runs of specifically the modernized T1s that had really weird looking tender font. So if we go through these 6 runs, you have the Paragon 1 modernized T1, then they reran it in Blue Line, also modernized T1, then they reran that again in Paragon 2 modernized T1. Then in the middle of Paragon 2, they modified the tooling and introduced the as-delivered T1 here. That one's newer than the Paragon 2 modernized run. And then finally, they made Paragon 3 runs of both the modernized and the as-delivered appearances. So in total, there's like 7 different variations of the T1, and each one looks a little bit different. So the Paragon 1 version, the very earliest one, had a 6-pin wire plug with QSI sound. It was heavier in the engine with more weight because there's no smoke unit. And notably, the DGLE they used was a little bit more green, which I don't personally like, but that's something to consider. And the tender font looked just similar to this. It looks right. For whatever reason, between that and Blue Line, they made the DGLE transition to a darker green, which I like. But then for whatever reason, they kind of ruined the Pennsylvania font in the tender. They chose a font that was like much taller, and they also so it looks, the font is off, and then also they shifted it to be off center on the tender, and that looks really, really weird. Probably some weird quality control issue, I'm not really sure, but in any case, it looks really strange, and that's why I don't recommend that run. Similarly, the Paragon 2 modernized T1 also has the weird tender font, also looks really weird. Actually, as I said, I used to own one of those, the Paragon 2 modernized T1s, and you can see in video clips the weird font, but I'll also share a picture here. So anyways, I don't like the look of that, and they corrected it when they released the as-delivered Paragon 2 T1, and then in both Paragon 3 runs, they have the correct font on both versions, which is good. Yeah. Now, so as I said, I wasn't looking for a modernized T1, but I also just wouldn't recommend the Paragon 1 just due to the green being too green and the 2 weird fonts runs. I don't recommend those either. So I was very specific in choosing, this run here. I could have also gotten a Paragon 3 T1 as delivered, but those cost a lot more for whatever reason, even though it's basically the same exact engine. So I didn't care for that, so I just got a Paragon 2. This was the one I could find for the best price. I paid $250 for this engine. The Paragon 2 modernized one I bought a while ago was $200, so you can get these for the mid to low $200 range, although I've seen these go for as much as $480, so they can go for a lot of money as well. But I find that the Paragon 2 ones are usually a little bit more affordable, and that's nice. So anyways, yeah, that's the engine. As far as this model itself goes, as I said, the as delivered ones are more detailed. I think BLI did a really good job with these models. The prototype, Pennsylvania historically the T1s didn't have a lot of external piping visible. So this model is relatively minimal in that department. There's not a lot of separately applied details, but the stuff that is there looks pretty good. I like the separately applied conduit here. There's some free floating piping here. I do wish that this pipe here, I believe this is the water inlet pipe. I wish this was separately applied. It's very noticeably molded on and, in my opinion, not done very well. But otherwise, it looks really good. I really like the see-through vents here. The portholes are obviously see-through. The gold paint is unfortunately coming off on my model, but that's not usually a problem. But they do look really clean. I really like the headlight trim. I think that's a really nice addition. The front keystone looks okay. It is correct in having being slightly bent, but I wish the outer bezel was gold. You can see from the side here, it's red. I wish the gold bezel was painted a little bit better. The front grille looks really nice, although it is not see-through. And then on this, you have brass whistle additions and safety valves. Yeah, and the other side, again, more separately applied, somewhat detail parts here. Yeah, so the detail honestly looks pretty good. It's satisfactory. It's not fantastic or anything like that, but it looks pretty good. I'm really glad that they made the throttle lever separately applied. That's a nice touch. But yeah, so my main complaints with this particular run, the as-delivered run, is the fact that one pipe here was molded on, which is a small little critique. And then also, these ladders are really, really thick. They are die-cast, and I understand why they made them really thick, to make them really solid, so they're not fragile at all. But they do look really, really chunky. So maybe at one point in the future, I plan to use a file and, thin these out a little bit by filing away some of the back, the insides. I might do that in the future. But it's not a big deal. But that's only really 2 areas I can see that could possibly improve on this model. Otherwise, they did a really good job. Similarly, the tender looks really, really nice. The cowl load looks good. The shrouding is a little bit thick from the sides. Don't know how well you can see that, but yeah, it is pretty thick. But that's not a big deal. It doesn't really bother me that much. Otherwise, this thing is absolutely gorgeous. I love the lining, striping. You can see the Stoker motor cover here. The train phone antenna is very sturdy and rigid, which is good. These are usually the first things to break off, so the fact that these are pretty rigid is good. Rear looks fantastic. I love the little print in the back. Yeah, so I mean, this tender looks really good. Very happy with how it looks. So yeah, anyways, overall, I think BLI did a really good job on the T1. I think the as delivered definitely looks a lot better than the modernized T1 as far as detail and exterior appearance goes. But yeah, I'm very happy with it. BLI did a great job with it. And yeah, very sturdy built, also very heavy, as I said. And yeah, so anyways, that's my kind of opinions of the model itself. Overall, I'm very happy with how this engine turned out. This project was very much a shot in the dark. Like, I did not know if it was going to be successful or not. I made some changes in the internals, so if it was irreversible, so if it didn't work out, I would be stuck with a broken T1. So this was definitely like a gamble, but I'm very very happy that it turned out well, and very happy with the results. Yeah, I'm sure some people will be turned off by the wheel slip feature. They think it's really overrated, which I can understand. But this was my only 4-cylinder engine in my roster. I don't have any other 4-cylinder engines. I don't have any other articulateds or duplexes in my personal fleet. So this was my only one, and I want to do something special with it. Knowing, especially with the history, the significance of the T1 prototypes, how they were prone to wheel slip, I really wanted to try to add this feature to my one 4-cylinder engine. And I think it turned out really, really good. I'm very happy with it. Now, was it worth the $200 I spent on additional decoders and the motors and all the extra time I did, making everything work? Yeah, some might say it wasn't worth it, but I'm honestly very happy with it. And yeah, that's up to you to decide. If one of you guys want to try it out, modifying your own articulated or duplex engines, it's up to you guys. But this is the only one I plan to ever do. I don't plan to do it for anyone else because it was just kind of a nightmare trying to get everything working. But I'm happy that I did it on mine, and I think it turned out great. But please let me know, what are your comments? What are your opinions? Does the effect look good? Is it worth doing, you think? Do you think manufacturers should start doing it? I personally don't think ready-to-run manufacturers will, employ this feature anytime soon, just because it can be really easily abused. People spinning the crap out of their wheels and damaging their wheels and burning out their motors. So I don't think any manufacturer wants to get into the warranty side of that, aspect. But it would be cool to see. I think it is a cool little feature. If it does mean sacrificing a little bit of pulling power and, messing with programming a little bit. But anyways, that's pretty much the video. Again, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to comment them down below. I try my best to answer all of it. And hopefully you guys enjoyed. Hopefully this video was informative. I know it's not the most entertaining video per se, it's just me talking a lot, but hopefully it was informative and or inspiring at the very least. And yeah, so hopefully you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next time. Take care.